Thanks for joining us, everybody. Let's get started. First of all, for some of you, it may be the first session that you're attending, so welcome. I'm Tom Venables from Turnkey UK. I'll be hosting the session where we're talking about compliance for all, how to simplify an application security framework for SAP. Throughout the session, if you'd like to ask any questions, I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, and hopefully we'll be able to jump in and get insight from Phil. And we will have some time at the end if we miss any as we're going through. So I'm really happy to be joined by Phil from Surpass, who's going to talk to us about how to be ready for your next audit through establishing a framework to demonstrate your compliance. Phil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tom. Phil Shipley, Director of Surpass Software. We're a software business, but we are born from a consulting business as well, specializing in SAP security and compliance.
Yeah, similar backgrounds for both of us, really, Phil. We've been securing SAP systems.
Similar challenges,
Yeah. So we're going to be exploring the challenges of ensuring and importantly demonstrating that your SAP operations are compliant. We're going to look at some of the most common findings that we have when we review SAP operations for our customers. You know, there's a lot of common themes that crop up in a lot of these implementations. And then we're going to look at how the application security framework is set up to overcome those challenges and what you can do to improve the compliance of your own landscapes, data, and critical systems. Hopefully you'll have some useful takeaways at the end of the session. As I say, do ask some questions. But Phil, over to you to talk us through it.
Okay. So common challenges around SAP security operations. I guess my business very much focused on the small medium business, small medium enterprise. All SAP businesses, all businesses running SAP, need to run their security model in a compliant and auditable manner. But yet many struggle to achieve that. And one of the key things that we help our customers with is, auditors are always looking for that evidence of your operational practices that are assuring that the users have the right access at the right time, and being able to, trace that you're doing what you're saying you're doing operationally, because it's documented and you can prove that you're doing what you say you would do.
I think that evidential piece is really important there. There's a lot of people working very hard to operate these things compliantly, but being able to prove it when you're asked is definitely where I see people struggle and where a lot of spend gets burned in those compliant operations.
Internal stakeholders are often unaware of their obligations, and stakeholders are from the board, the risk committee, through the C-suite, right down to the end user. All users of the SAP solution have a role to play in operating it in a secure way, upholding principles of least privilege and job relevant access, but also ownership and approval and accountability. Where that's not documented, and people come and go from these positions of responsibility, they often don't understand their obligations until an auditor is asking them some very sticky questions, right?
Yeah, and on that one, do you see it as a risk ownership challenge, or
yes, risk and ownership. So many businesses, a CFO or a CIO may be deemed to be the SAP system owner, but if they don't have a governance model, and if it doesn't articulate delegation and accountability, then when an auditor says, well, we've found a breach, we've found potential fraud, it comes right back to that system owner that's going to be held to account that they didn't have the processes in place to operate securely. So it's very much accountability and ownership is what they're unaware of.
Yeah, I think I certainly see that in a lot of clients, the IT end up being sort of a de facto
Yeah.
owner of a lot of these
Yes.
challenges, when actually they're just reacting to a business
Yeah.
drive. And yeah, it's a challenging discussion to have with somebody to say, by the way, you're the one that
Yeah,
gets the
that's
prison if this
right.
risk is realized, right?
It wasn't me, Your Honor. Yeah. Um, yeah. Original business role designs give way to access creep over time as users demand and retain more access. So I think many small businesses are guilty of access creep, and a lot of that is because users are the ones saying, "I need access to this and that." I'm still doing my old job even though I'm in a new job, or I'm training my replacement, and access gets left behind. And so, with all the best intentions of doing business role designs, um, you know, companies end up in a mess. And if a framework's not in place to help stay clean or retain what they originally went live with, then access creep is inevitable. And I guess that's what I mean by access by design becomes unsustainable, because if documenting a design and sticking to it, again for all the best intentions, becomes just a distant memory for many businesses. Some of my customers have been running SAP 20 plus years, and they've had no redesign work done. They can't put their hand on a business process document or a design document for their security, and you look at their users and roles and it's a complete mess. So access by design, it's a key thing for auditors to come in and say, are you doing what you said you would do? Are you giving your users what you said they should have? And if they can't attest to that, then you're just open for significant findings in your audits.
Yeah, I think that losing sight of the original sort of security architecture and the, you start with the best intentions, but if you don't refresh that over time, then I think you're absolutely right. We actually have a question related to that audit piece. Someone, Ritesh, has asked how we ensure to keep the trail of evidence intact for the audit purposes when there's different software in use in the organization. So across multiple systems, how do we establish that?
And that's where something like an operational guide or practices articulate the need for the appropriate steps in the appropriate systems for request and approve. It's your change request management system. And often when you start to define an operational guideline for your security operations, but you have to process model. So how do we initiate a request, process that request, obtain approvals? How do we capture the evidence and store those approvals? How can we be sure that when an auditor takes a sample, that everything is done and done correctly? And also means good training, right? Making sure that your security administrators are not taking shortcuts, always upholding the principles and saying, no, I will not do that without appropriate approvals. So it's the operating model becomes the solution, not necessarily a software or the linking of certain systems together.
Yeah, and I think that's all that foundation is laid in the sort of security framework that we're talking about here, right?
And just the last point there, absence of an SOD tool leaves customers unaware of their true risk position. So often when we do reviews and we say, okay, a lot of this framework is not in place, sometimes the response is, we trust our people. And just because a business doesn't know that does not know that they've had a breach, or they're not aware of the potential risk for internal fraud, doesn't mean it's not happening or it's not about to happen, right? So SOD tools certainly play a part in the framework of knowing what your true risk position is.
Absolutely. And trying to do it without a tool is why my hairline is the way it is.
Yes. So I just thought I'd run through a few, typical findings when we do a review, and often when I do a review, I'm measuring against this framework. What elements of this framework does the customer have in place? And often a governance model is not implemented, and therefore stakeholders are not aware of their obligations. An operations guide is missing or not sufficiently driving administration practices. If processes are not written down, how do you hand over, how do you train as security administrators come and go? And how do you ensure that consistency is there year after year? Because the auditors are looking for that consistency as well.
Absolutely, and that sort of target operating model, those standard operating procedures are key to making sure that people are not only doing their job but doing it and demonstrating that. So that audit trail piece that Ritesh was asking about is absolutely tied in with the people operating the procedures.
Yes,
right?
And the same can be said for standards and principles. Often a project will start with a nice naming convention, and you might look in the system as consultants come and go. You see multiple naming conventions in the role bill, and it's like, well, you can almost tell who been where if you follow each other around. But to document that and ensure that's part of the training of any security administrator, again, ensures consistency and makes it easy for new consultants to come and go and understand what that build is meant to look like. Design document. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, just on that one, I think something we tend to forget as security administrators is that the easier it is to understand to the user, the easier it is to stay compliant and within the process.
Yeah.
So transparency and naming conventions really help them understand what the security model is meant to be. It's an important part. User experience is tied to security.
Yeah, absolutely. Design documentation out of date or of little relevance to the current user access model. Again, auditors will look for that evidence. What did you say you were going to design, build, and implement? And is that the current state of access today in the system? And if they can't correlate what users have, what they can access, what they can do to a design, then it opens up the whole question of, well, how did that change? And that'll then put a lens on your change and release processes. How are these changes getting through? How are they getting approved? And there is no current picture of who is meant to have what access. Right? Business controls not documented or implemented. So again, not having a SOD tool may not be aware of risk. But then, if there's no controls to show an auditor that at least some essential processes are in place to ensure someone can't raise a purchase order and approve it, or those sort of common financial controls where you've got to be keeping an eye on how money is moving through your business, and if that's not written down, if there's not processes around executing those controls, then you're wide open to audit findings.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not operating with a cast of thousands, you've got to have some mitigations in place. And most people, I'm hoping, are familiar with things like three-way matching and 4I principles and release strategies, etc. But do you know if they're addressing your risk is a really important part of it?
User access not aligned with business access requirements or being job relevant. So again, that's the whole access creep thing, and being able to look at a user and know that they have what they need to do their job, or what is that job. And then that also then comes back to access by design. And when that is lost, when that becomes a distant memory, it's very hard to then prove to an auditor that your users have just what they need to do their jobs. And provisioning not being linked to HR events. So again, we get the whole, if someone leaves, are you appropriately terminating their access? When someone transfers, retaining and gaining new accesses, making sure that they're job relevant. No annual user access reviews, and again, access creep over time. One of the fundamental processes that any small business should be doing to be audit ready is demonstrating their bill that they have actually reviewed access on users and pulled that back to being, the least privileged for them to do their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those last three points are really fundamentally linked. Understanding what the job
Yes.
is, what their tasks are,
Yeah.
and who your employees are. We're talking about fundamentals of identity management, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And that risk exposure, most small businesses seem to operate on a principle of trust and have not seen any financial losses due to fraudulent activity, and therefore they believe that they're okay. But not knowing is just head in the sand stuff. So that comes back to controls, defining risks. All of this sort of comes together and feeds itself towards being audit ready. Okay, so when I talk security framework, to me it's a set of document artifacts that support the design, build, and compliant operation of the security model and the overall identity and access management capabilities of that business. And I group them into 4 key areas: governance, design, policy, and controls. And then, as a simplified framework, the 5 elements there shown in green on the diagram are the minimum that I would recommend a business has in place to be audit ready. So, the governance model, defining those accountability responsibilities of all stakeholders throughout the business, so that everyone understands ultimate accountability, delegation of authority, and approval and ownership processes. A support access model. Another thing that we always find is support access and consultant access into production and non-production environments is often a black hole. Documenting a support model that is creates segregation between like your basis, your security, your functional, your developer type consultants, and ensuring that they can only look after their part of the system. And then in production, ensuring that they cannot transact on behalf of the end user and that their role is to display and to troubleshoot. Documenting that, and we have a template set of roles that go with that. Putting that in place can reduce a lot of risk and create a lot of assurance to auditors that those with elevated access can really only also do their jobs.
Just on that IT versus business access, I was actually having this discussion yesterday. One way that I've managed to get that landed in customers that I've been reviewing is by saying to the IT managers, how much of the finance budget have you got to perform these activities?
Yeah.
And they go, well, none. I'm like, well, push it back then. You've got, if you're not getting paid for it, why are you doing it?
Agree. Principles and standards, as we spoke earlier, at least solid naming convention, approaches to quality build, and how you do the basics of building security, resulting in your quality business roles and making it clear who's got what and all that. Documenting that again helps with keeping that sustainable, ongoing. The operational guideline. So again, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And being able to attest to auditors that you're doing what you said you would do. And that's the whole end-to-end, from your user access request through to provisioning. It's the good housekeeping, your weekly or fortnightly tasks where you might be doing some checks and balances and you're making sure that users are appropriately terminated, checking that no one's been given SAP all in production, those sort of things where you just want to be sure that you're doing the minimum that you need to just have some level of assurance that you're not too exposed. And then the critical authorizations management document is something that a number of our customers have asked for, and so we've kept it as part of the model. And that is, if someone new comes along to do security admin, they should at least have this to go back to and go, well, this is how I treat certain sensitive and critical authorizations in the role build. just as a way of checking themselves. As they build, they don't reintroduce authorizations that have been removed and appropriately managed in that security model.
Yeah, that comes back to what you were saying about establishing standards and principles, right?
Yes.
Every organization has got that third rail you can't touch. It might be critical customer data or IP or
Yes.
certain risk factors. We actually had a question from Ritesh as well, saying, how do we ensure that the governance model complies with achieving the organization objectives? It can be difficult to tie the sort of company objectives to the risk and governance model. And I think that speaks to a big part of it is understand where your third rail is.
Yes. I've been thinking in establishing that governance model. Part of that conversation obviously is talking with senior leadership, even if it's only IT leadership who can then talk to the business and the board. Is about ensuring that access risk and general risk through the SAP platform is on the risk register. It's part of that broader view of business risk. And if a business is not willing to see SAP access risk on that register of more business critical risks that they would want to manage, then they're missing the point that their financial management system is a big opportunity for financial loss, reputational loss, loss of operations. It's got to be on that agenda, right? And then once it is accepted that that's part of how they need to operate, that there has to be a lens on their SAP system, then defining that governance model becomes easy, because then they have a vested interest in that model succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So the framework, as I said, it's got those four main areas. I just wanted to quickly touch on some of the benefits. So a governance model, defining that responsibility and accountability for the execution of documented process is crucial to being compliant and audit ready, doing what you said you were going to do. The design model. Design record provides a reference for audit to measure design versus build and the change control and approval process. The last thing you want is to, something be evident in production that you can't justify how it got there. That's a big red flag for auditors. Policy and procedure, right? All stakeholders having a process to follow, ensuring sustainability and integrity of the access design. Auditors can then follow the intended process to measure compliance with your own internal process. There's nothing worse than being measured to being compliant with no process, right? And management can review and update and strengthen policy as audits come through. You learn. I mean, audits are a good thing, right? You want audits to tell you how you could be doing things better. You want to avoid adverse findings, but you want that sort of, okay, that's great, tick. What else can you now be doing to strengthen that model?
That's a really good point. I find a lot of my customers tend to fear audits, or can certainly behave as if they fear audits, rather than inviting them in and saying, how can we be better? What management attention can we get on these processes? Whilst we obviously come at it with a risk reduction agenda, there's a lot of operational efficiencies and improvements that come out of these reviews. It's a good way to achieve your objectives within the business. So using these compliance arguments to say, actually, if we were to automate our JML, we'd not only save money, but reduce risk. And audits can be a way to get that sort of attention at the board level that you need.
Okay. So what can your business be doing today? So governance model certainly will make a big difference to taking you towards improving compliance, documenting that ownership. But in doing so, you're having that conversation, right? And you're making it quite clear to your leadership team, to your board, that there's a lot of it. security is not an expense, right? Being audit ready shouldn't be seen as oh, we have to do it, but we don't want to do it. By just getting that model in place and make sure everyone's clear on what they have to do to be compliant, reduces that shock when the auditor turns up and goes, hey, show me this, this, and this, and you can't, right? So very important to get the governance model in place. Principles and standards, again, documenting how you do things and how you want them done long term. You're setting those standards so that as your administrators come and go, you get that consistency going forward. The procedures, document your routine operations. You all are doing it. If you haven't written it down, write it down. A simple business process mapping exercise. What are the steps? What are the systems involved? What are the handoff points? It will be a learning experience. You'll understand where there are inefficiencies, and as you document, you will see opportunities for improvement. Make your processes repeatable. Right, that's the test that they are going to sustain you long term. And ensure 100% evidence collection for all requests, approvals, and any actions, any changes flowing through your system. Ensure that your processes ensure that there's always that evidence collection at every step. And the critical authorizations. You may have previous audit findings. You may have findings that you are yet to address, but you know what auditors are looking for. Well, then document how you've removed those issues from your security model, and therefore can show that you are constantly looking at that as you go forward.
Yeah, and just to, you talked about the obligations of the stakeholders from the board to the end user. Your focus on SMEs is a really good one, because you're not dealing with massive organizations where you can't get the stakeholders in the room. Do you find that the top-down approach works best? So establish your risk owners essentially at board level and let those delegate and filter down?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess where I've seen it most successful, I've been able to get access to like the CIO, and obviously the CIO would be on the risk committee, or talking to the CEO, who then would be obviously talking to the board, and just making sure that audit readiness is a priority of the leadership team. Where we've been most successful is we've put in a model, and we've educated each of those stakeholders as to what that model is saying, and then introducing maybe an SOD tool, and then having all of these repeatable processes embedded, that when the next audit comes along, they're not getting the adverse findings. They're getting a tick in the box that they've made significant progress in just being able to demonstrate that they're doing what they said they would do, they're meeting their obligations, and then that feeds back to the CIO, the CEO, and the board, and they go, great, it was really good to put something in place, no matter how simple, but at least documented, and they can be attested to the fact that they're doing what they said they would do.
Yeah, it's really important. Thanks for that, Phil. I mean, you've shown us how the framework establishes that baseline that you can measure yourself against. And I think that's the key takeaway is don't be measured against a blank piece of paper. We've caught up on all of the questions that have been submitted as we go, but if anybody does have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. Phil and I will try and pick them up offline.
Yeah.
Phil, thanks very much for walking us through that.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present.
Yeah, really insightful. Thank you. So coming up next, we've got a packed schedule as we continue to make the world a safer place to do business. So we're going to be talking about some social engineering and the human factors that influence that. So obviously your SAP users are one of your key user groups to secure. From there, we're talking about establishing zero trust and some of the trends and spends that are going on in cybersecurity. And then we're starting to focus on tying this back to the risk management agenda. So the integrated risk management options. So interesting sessions all through today, and tomorrow we're really going to focus in on the identity part of securing our landscapes. I think it's safe to say that the perimeter now is the identity, and the access, as Phil has been talking about, that you're allocating to those identities is a key part of it. So we hope you continue to enjoy the conference, you find it useful. Thanks for joining us, and Phil, thanks once again for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.